Okay, so I know that the primary focus of this workshop is to talk about ethics across the curriculum, but we're giving you a presentation on the 4 core courses that we have within the leadership, ethics, and law. But Roger's going to give you a short intro here and then talk much more detail tomorrow. So Captain Roger Herbert is the Distinguished Military Professor for Ethics, and I know that he is humble enough that he won't tell you how unique and how incredible his career has been. He was a graduate of Davidson College, and for those of basketball fans who know Steph Curry, Roger would tell you that he taught Steph Curry everything that he knows about basketball. And from there, Roger went into the Navy, and he is a Navy SEAL with a very unique perspective on things, which has been a significant addition to talking about this part about ethical, moral reasoning of naval leaders, and in the context of being a warfighter. So Roger got his terminal degree at University of Virginia, and we're really glad to have him on board here to be our course coordinator for NE 203. And Roger, if I may, we did this before, but when you look at who is teaching NE 203, it's a very unique setup that we have, combining philosophers with senior officers who lead the discussion part of the 2 of the classes. But Roger, I'm going to let you take it from there. Thank you very much for coming in and adding to our course.
Great, awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Doug. And it really is a pleasure to talk with y'all today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about why we teach NE 203, why we teach ethics at the Naval Academy, and then a little bit about how we do that. And then hopefully I'll also, like Mike, have lots of space for questions. And if not, as Doug points out, we've got lots of time together tomorrow. So we'll start with the why. So I mean, I guess the first part of the why is that we have to. This is one of, I believe, 2 congressionally mandated courses that we teach. So all of the service academies have an ethics course that they teach. But you know, we really don't need Congress to tell us this, because it's all over our mission statement. Certainly the moral and mental development of our midshipmen. As Doug points out, I'm a retired SEAL, so I'm working on the physical element. There's got to be some sort of way to, I mean, if they misquote Aristotle, make them do 10 push-ups or something. Anyway, I'm still working on that part. Duty, honor, and loyalty. We like they do in NL 110. We really pull apart what those and other virtues are. So they're not just bumper stickers for our students. We go deep into them. The idea of character is another thing that we make sure when they get through with NE 203, it's no longer just a bumper sticker, and they realize that character is a dynamic thing. It's something that changes every day. And in our current course, they hopefully they'll walk away understanding that. In our pilot course, which I'll be talking about soon, we actually give them certain exercises to maybe say, this could be a way, an approach to develop your character. And then finally, the idea of responsibilities of command. The entire course is embedded in the idea of our moral responsibilities to our troops, to the mission, and to the Constitution. So if that's not reason enough, I don't exactly know the date this was done, but this is a recent study, and it should make us feel good about our high schoolers. 98% say that it's really important to be a person of character, and almost the same amount are satisfied and think, yeah, you know what, and I am a person of character. And in fact, 3/4 of them think that they've got better character than most of the people that they know. So all of that is good news, except for the fact that 81% of them say that in the last year they lied to a parent. Again, a majority of them have lied to a teacher. A third of them have plagiarized on a test. Most have cheated on a test. And a quarter of them have either stolen from a parent or from a store. So this isn't kind of one of these kids today slides as it looks like. Again, I'm not really sure when this was. I think that this is somewhat timeless. I mean, I gotta, as I look at it, I gotta admit, I've lied to my parents. I've lied to a teacher. I don't think I've ever plagiarized on a paper, at least not knowingly. But in my high school, cheating on tests, we did that from time to time. Never stole from a parent, but when I was 12, from about age 12 to age 13, I went on a rampage of stealing cigars. Some kid called me a goody-goody. I didn't like, so I started shoplifting cigars until my dad found out about it. So anyway, the point is, again, not kids today. The point is that there's a fairly significant delta between what the average person thinks is a person of character and what the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Naval Academy believe represents a person of character. And we have to close down that delta, and we play a major part in that. Another reason why we teach ethics here, for many years now, the military has been the most trusted institution in the US. So the bottom line is that our nation trusts us. But the other bottom line is that that trust is very fragile. I'm looking at the little squares on my laptop, and most of you all look younger than I am. A few of y'all are my age or older though, and we remember that this was not always so. In fact, if you had told the 16-year-old version of me that someday the military would be the most trusted institution, I would have been shocked. I would say that we would, back in those days, we were somewhere around the level of Congress. And, you know, as we're hearing from a lot of our military leaders now, that trust really matters. That may be the greatest strength that we have, and we can't lose it. And again, our course is geared around, we are not going to lose it on the fact that we lack the moral direction. So we in Lewis Hall tend to worship at the altar of James Stockdale. Honestly, it's a good altar to worship at. By the way, the statue on the right, it's supposed to be Epictetus. So if you Google Epictetus, you come up with that statue on the right. That's why I put it there. It's actually Epicurus, which turns out wouldn't be as good. And one of our philosophers brought that to my attention. But it hasn't deterred me from using it, because I love that stare that I think Epictetus should have. And then, looking at the pictures of real Epictetus, he's not as intense looking. So I'm okay with a little bit of a noble lie here. But back to Stockdale. So here's a guy who quite literally, and when he was alive, he swore up and down that this is the truth, as he is under canopy, falling into what he knew would be 5 or so years on the ground in North Vietnam in prison. His words were, "I'm leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus." And to say that his knowledge of the Stoic tradition saved his life is not an understatement. This course, bottom line, can save lives, both literally and there's other ways of dying, and moral injury is real. Okay, I want to take a couple of seconds to talk about how we teach. And then, maybe I'll end up with a good 10 minutes of Q&A after this. Although it may be worth, speaking of Q&A, to pause for just a second. Again, I'm going to turn to how next, but any questions about the why here? Or additions from my colleagues, because so many of them have been part of this. Okay, good. Let me turn to the next piece of this, and that's the meat and potatoes. Okay, there it is. So this is the course map you looked at. I think I gave you two course maps, an NE203 classic course map and pilot. And I'll talk about the difference in a second and why I'm talking about both. But let's start with the classic course. So our course is built around four big questions. The first is we ask the question of, where do our moral obligations come from? Where is our sense of right and wrong come from? And we look at our self-interest, we look at culture, we look at religion. We also look at that special obligation we take on when we take our oath. Then we turn to the next big question, and that is, who should I be at that moment that I'm confronted? At that moment that I'm confronted with a moral choice. And here we dig into the tradition of virtue ethics, both the Aristotelian and also the Stoic tradition. The next big question we ask is sort of the fundamental question of ethics, and that is, what is the right thing to do? So when confronted with a moral dilemma, how do I work through that? And we work through sort of the big two here of deontological approaches and also the consequentialist approaches of utilitarianism. We look at rights and justice, and also, we look at rights, and we also look at both distributive justice, how the burdens and benefits of society are distributed, and also retributive justice, which our students engage from their second sentence and end sentence. And then the final part of the course, it turns to how we fight and win with honor. So this goes into the just war tradition, which, by the way, draws on all of these other traditions that serve as a base. So that's our classic course. For the last 3 years, we've been experimenting, and I think it actually may be more than 3. We've been experimenting with other ways of approaching the task of introducing our students to moral reasoning. And I'll highlight some of the changes quickly. To start with, we begin the course with a slightly different question. Rather than where do my moral obligations come from, it's more, how do I recognize them? How do I recognize when it's time to consider those tools of moral reasoning? And we look at some of the elements, some of the biases that can either bring our attention to the salient elements of the moral world, or maybe obfuscate it as well. Honestly, I think that this is absolutely a critical innovation of the pilot. As I look back at my naval career and at mistakes that both I made and that other people made, either that I saw or sometimes famously made, it sometimes came from the fact that they didn't even realize that it was time to take a moment, smoke a cigarette, think about what the right thing to do is, start actually doing some moral reasoning. So I think that is a really important innovation. Next, we turn to what is the right thing to do. And again, we focus on some of the major elements. It's not a radical change from the classic course, but you may recognize from the reading how we break this up into constraints, consequences, special obligations, and character. The key difference is, rather than giving our students a pluralistic approach, a tool bag to reach from, we give them a process, a framework for moral reasoning, something that they can potentially and hopefully do at the speed of war. And we'll talk about that more in detail tomorrow. This next question is again, it's the same question we ask in the classic course. Who should I be at that moment when I'm confronted with a decision with significant moral content? But as you may have noticed, there's a lot more blocks down there. One of the decisions that we made as we moved from the classic to the pilot is we need to spend more time with this. That virtue is perhaps more important than we had given it time for. In the classic course, we spend 2 weeks with virtue ethics. Here we spend, or in the pilot, we spend 5. And then we conclude the pilot the same way we conclude the classic, looking at the just war tradition. And one other thing, going back to the that bit on virtue ethics, as I mentioned before, another innovation here is we've introduced, rather than doing just a normal paper at the end of each block, we do an application paper at the end of each block in the other blocks. But this one we do reflection papers, and we actually give our students the opportunity to do exercises, recognizing that character is something that we can deliberately shape. Give them a chance to do that, to dip their toes in that water. We're not going to make somebody more courageous, but perhaps we can get them thinking about how they could themselves, if they work on it, if they actually have that drive to become more virtuous in that area, can become more courageous. Okay, those are my course maps, and I think I've just got one more slide. Yeah. And I see that Marcus is on this meeting. I don't know if Marcus knows that he's part of my slide deck in this. You look so young there.
That was just before I came to Annapolis, Roger, so I don't know what you're saying about the amount of time I've been here.
Marcus is not the guy in Marble. Who, by the way, we should know that guy because he's famously ugly. The guy in Marble, not the guy standing next to him, is famously good looking. Anybody know who the guy in Marble is? A famously ugly scholar, philosopher, Greek. Nope. Yeah, that's Socrates. I am right there, right, Marcus? That is Socrates. I didn't get that statue
Yep,
wrong.
it's at the Vatican Museums.
Oh, cool. Okay, so this is my last slide, I think, and going to how we teach it. This is probably the greatest strength of the course. Back when we started this up, we had we were told by Congress back in the mid-90s we need to do this. So in classic Navy fashion, we go out and hire 5 philosophers instead of 25 like they did at the other service academies, and we brought in an engineer. It's Rick Rubel. Y'all may recognize an engineer to say, "Hey, you make this work." And an engineer would be the perfect guy, right? You take, let me give you some baling wire and some duct tape and figure it out. And it turns out that this weakness became the greatest strength of our course. So we team teach this course so that on an average week, you'll have a philosopher, a professional, no kidding, full-on philosopher, PhD, teaching Aristotelian virtue ethics. And then on, like you might see at any other university. And then on Wednesdays and Fridays, the military instructor, all senior officers, many of whom are on this on this meeting right now. We'll start by saying, okay, do we understand what Marcus was talking about on Monday? We all got that, okay? And now apply that to life as a Marine Corps officer or an officer in the Navy. So this is applied ethics writ large. And again, what started off perhaps as a weakness turned out to be, I think, the greatest strength of this program, this combination of philosophers and senior officers who have enormous experience. And we have 6 philosophers, by the way, teaching the course. And depending on the semester, somewhere around 30 senior officers who are volunteers from across the yard, who give up their free time because this course is so important. And so many of them, as they leave the Naval Academy, will say that the best thing, the highlight of their time at Naval Academy was teaching this course. So with that, and with 8 minutes to go, I'm standing by for your questions and comments. And again, we're going to dig way deeper into this tomorrow.
So this is Mark. Can you talk more about the student response to the pilot versus the classic version? Is it too early to talk about that?
No. Again, we've been doing this for several years, and it is a little bit hard to tease out the differences because the students love the classic course and they love the pilot course. And on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, you start at, as we're nudging up against 5 for both courses, you don't have a whole lot of room. We have started seeing a difference the last 2 semesters we've taught this in terms of perhaps a noticeable advantage to the pilot. I will say as I look over as I talk to the military instructors who teach both courses, me being one of them. So I teach on the military side of it, on the military instructor side of it, rather than the Monday lecturer. It gives us a better handhold to teach our Wednesday and Friday classes. And that's no surprise because I mean, the classic course was built around, I don't know, let's do kind of what you do at most courses. We have been gathering a lot of data through the years, and the pilot course responds to that. So from those who teach both, there actually has, and from the military instructor side, not one of us thinks that the pilot is not a superior course. And something I'd meant to add about where we are with this. So we just recently voted in our curriculum committee, so the NE 203 curriculum committee, that we wanted to transition to the pilot course ultimately. Now we're still at we're still just starting with that because that needs to go to lead division and then ultimately to the faculty senate curriculum committee. But at our level, meaning at the NE 203 level, so my level, we have voted to move in this direction. They're both great courses, though, Mark. Thanks for asking.
And then I have the follow up is
Yep.
is do the people who are teaching the 2 follow-on courses can they tell who took what? Like we changed our gateway sequence, and in the process where the pilot was running, I actually, one of the reasons I was sure we were doing the right thing is in my follow-on courses, I could tell who had taken what.
So that's like an awesome question that we had never even, or I had never even thought of. That would be a wonderful way of gauging this. I don't know if there would be any discernible difference, but that would be a really interesting question to ask, and we have not asked that. Thanks, Mark.
Hey, Mark, as one of the instructors, if I could, this is Doug Brown, one of the things that I think that I have gotten from my midshipmen who have a roommate who is not in the pilot, which is a little bit of an interesting dialogue, right? Is that, and Roger stated this, in the classic course he was taught, it tended to be somewhat pluralistic, in that here's a series of ways to think about different problems, and then we'll give you a case study. And how about thinking about it from this perspective? And so it was somewhat kind of pushing in a certain direction to say, for this type of problem, maybe use this type of problem, maybe use that. And the pilot starts from a very different position. And I think that the midshipmen recognize that it's a process. Let's start by recognizing you've got a moral dilemma. And what's my next thing? What are your moral constraints? And then you kind of work your way through. And as you work through this roadmap, as Roger will show you tomorrow, you touch on all of the aspects that are taught in the classic course, but it has a little bit of a flow to it. And that's what I get from my midshipmen who are in the pilot compared to the roommates who are not in the pilot. It's the process part.
Hey, Doug, I just wanted to follow up on that. As an engineer, Roger, I really appreciate the structure and the flow that you've provided, because this is nearly identical to the design solution process that we teach the engineers. First, you must identify what the problem is, go back and talk to stakeholders to better understand that, and then understand what are your constraints and acceptable alternatives, and then moving forward from there to design a solution. So I really appreciate knowing that this structure is provided to them, and I think it's an element that we could use to build upon and draw those parallels.
Wow, that's awesome, Allison.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, and one of the things to respond to both Allison and Mark's question, one of the reasons we maybe haven't seen it as much in the upper divisions is because we haven't, until we knew that we wanted to move forward, we haven't really kind of asked those people to use the same framework or the same language, right? And so this next year, and in fact, this class is probably the first time that we're going to kind of go forward with that language and that framework. And so hopefully that will provide something that there can be hooks to, both within the department and without.
Yeah, it might be interesting, Marcus, if some elements out of this discussion come to provide for you, is to put some indicators in the future to say, this is how engineers think. And so you can use the same process to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for a little bit of background, I actually came to philosophy very late in life. I'm a former physicist, and so so I'm part of the appeal to me as well as that same process.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Professor Herbert, thank you very much for this excellent overview of the NE 203 ethics course. And as Professor Rao said earlier, in day 2, tomorrow's session, we'll spend a number of hours talking about ethics and the ideas that you present in NE 203, not just an overview of the course, but the way that we approach moral reasoning. With that, we'll take a short break, and we will move on to the third of the leadership sequence courses, NL 310 and Commander Wallace.
It's very nice meeting you all, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.